If Julio Jones is traded to the Titans, where would you feel comfortable drafting AJ Brown? That and much, much more coming up on episode 3 of the Football Guys Mailbag Show. Just a reminder that you can send all of your questions to mailbag at footballguys.com. You should be able to see that right up in the corner here. And you can also just send us your DMs on Twitter, and we can take care of you there. Troy and I will go over and answer as many as we can every single week. We're bringing the show to you live every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. We're going to start off by answering these submitted questions, but please be sure to drop your questions live in the chat right now, and Troy and I will get to those at the end of the show. Also, be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguystv, where we are bringing you all of the shows: 2 Point Stance, The Audible, The Dynasty Show, The Dynasty Newsletter Show, and much, much more to come. So without further ado, let's kick it off. Troy, if Julio Jones is traded to the Titans, where would you feel comfortable drafting AJ Brown?
I'm still treating AJ Brown as a bona fide wide receiver 1. I believe that Julio Jones helps AJ Brown, to be honest with you, because right now all the coverage is going to go to AJ Brown's way, because who are they going to be scared of? Josh Reynolds. So with Julio Jones there, I feel comfortable probably drafting him in the second round still. I think that's fair. Maybe late second is probably where I would draft him. Late second, early third. That's what I'm looking at for AJ Brown if Julio ends up being a Titan.
Yeah, and I'm sure anybody that has looked at the rankings has seen it, that I'm very, very high on AJ Brown this year. There's just so much to like. I mean, when you look at his efficiency, the dude is an absolute monster. And then with Jonnu Smith and Corey Davis leaving, it just opens up such an opportunity for him to get a ton of usage as well. So right now, AJ Brown is my overall wide receiver 1 in both Dynasty and redraft. Now, I've heard a lot of people, and Troy, I'm not trying to call you out specifically, but a lot of people are saying that, he could be better with Julio there. And I just don't see that happening. One of the things that's most enticing to me right now about AJ Brown is that he is, possibly going to see 150 to 200 targets next year in this offense. So I think that if Julio ends up there, I think that we're still going to see a efficiency monster out of AJ Brown. He's going to rack up those yards after the catch. He's still going to find the end zone a lot. But I don't think that you're going to see that 150-plus mark in the targets anymore. So I would move him from my wide receiver 1, still have him as a pretty elite wide receiver 1, but rather than the overall wide receiver 1, he would slide down to wide receiver 7 for me. So that puts Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, DK Metcalf, and Calvin Ridley all ahead of him. One other thing that I wanted to call out, though, is that a lot of people have used the argument that Calvin Ridley is better with Julio Jones as a reason for AJ Brown possibly being better if Julio Jones ends up there. And it really doesn't take that much to look into it. That just frankly isn't true. The only thing that Calvin Ridley did better when Julio Jones was there was he had a touchdown rate that was much higher. He was averaging 0.86 touchdowns per game as opposed to 0.43 touchdowns per game without Julio. But targets, receptions, and yards all went up when Julio wasn't there. Without Julio, Calvin Ridley last year saw 11.3 targets per game, 7.1 receptions, and 109 yards. With Julio, all of those numbers dropped to 8.4 targets, 5.7 receptions, 87 yards per game. And that's on a very pass-heavy team. So if we're looking at a run-first team like the Titans, where they're already going to be fighting for targets, I think putting in another stud like Julio Jones just lowers his ceiling just a little bit.
No, I mean, you make a great argument. And I think in terms of when I say helps AJ Brown, it's definitely not going to help him in the target category. Obviously, that's going to be more split if Julio happens to be a Titan. But at the same time, I think he's always going to be efficient. So whether he's by himself or with Julio Jones, AJ Brown, he's going to be efficient. Just that offense, obviously they run first. They're still going to be run first. But if you have both of those talents there, I just feel sorry for defenses.
Yeah, and you say both of those talents and don't even mention Derrick Henry. I mean, what are you supposed to do as a defense when you got AJ Brown on one side of the field, Julio Jones on the other, Derrick Henry in the backfield, and then you got Tannehill, who's a pretty capable runner himself too. I mean, that's a nightmare for defenses. So that would be a ton of fun to see. But obviously, as I'm sure you could expect, Julio is the hot topic this week. Everybody wants to talk about Julio Jones. We saw him. What show was it with Shannon Sharp? You saw that, right?
Undisputed.
On Undisputed. Yeah, Shannon Sharp takes the phone call, and it has just been mayhem ever since. So we'll start off with a couple Julio questions here. But here's another one from Jordan Vanek. When Julio Jones inevitably gets traded away, where do you put Russell Gage in your rankings? What about you, Troy?
I have him currently ranked at 84. So it's not someone that you're going to be, rushing to draft, or maybe he needs a priority draft. There's obviously other priorities in that offense: Kyle Pitts, Calvin Ridley. So he moves up a little bit, but it's not someone who's going to take a significant jump if Julio gets traded.
Yeah, and when you look at the depth chart, like he seems to be the wide receiver too if Julio isn't there. And you've got to assume that he's going to get some solid opportunity on a team that, realistically, the Falcons could throw the ball like 650 times next year. And weirdly enough though, when I was looking at his splits with and without Julio, Russell Gage is somebody who actually did play better when Julio was in the lineup. Targets, yards, everything were higher when Julio was there. So yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I've got him ranked somewhere 85, and then the football guys consensus is 81. So when you're looking at guys in that tier, that pretty much just makes them undraftable unless you're playing in, a 20-team league or something like that. So the thing for me though is when I look at the depth chart, I just can't see anybody else that has more talent than Russell Gage does. We've got Tajay Sharp, Olamide Zaccheaus, Frank Darby. I don't see those guys carving out a huge role. So I think that, it's going to be Calvin Ridley as the guy. You'll have Kyle Pitts as the number 2 option. And then Russell Gage probably falls in as the number 3 option. But I don't know how much that really makes a difference here. So, I mean, are you willing to move this at all? Or where would you move him up from your current ranking of 80 something? Where would you be able to move him up to?
84. I might be able to move him up maybe into the 70s, maybe late 70s or something like that. But I'm not going to significantly move him up, to be honest with you, man. And it's like I like Russell Gage as a player, but it's not someone I'm holding my horses, right? Because he's a wide receiver 2 on an offense, but is he going to be filling in that Calvin Ridley role, and Calvin Ridley is going to be a Julio Jones role? I don't believe so. So I'm tempering my expectations. I'm not super excited. So he's a good flex. So he's a good wide receiver 3 for your team, but not someone you're going to go crazy for.
Yeah, I think the guy that makes the biggest move on the Falcons offense, if for whatever reason Julio Jones does get traded, I think Calvin Ridley. Then you start having a conversation where he could realistically be in like the top 3 as far as rankings go. So I think Calvin Ridley would move quite a bit, and there's got to be somebody, but it's not. Russell Gage isn't somebody that you can get excited about. It's not like you're ever drafting Russell Gage and hoping that he's a wide receiver 2 that you can plug in. He's a late round flyer, but yeah, I don't think that he'd be moving up more than like wide receiver 60, wide receiver 55. It would be pretty tough to move him any higher than that. Just I'm looking at the guys that are ranked over there, and McCole Hardman, Mike Williams, Marvin Jones, Michael Pittman. I just can't see myself putting Russell Gage ahead of any of those guys.
Me neither, man. I'm on the same boat with you. I'll have those other guys ahead of Gage as well.
Cool. For anybody that was watching this live, I realized that we had the wrong background. So again, up in the top right now, you can see it. Send your questions to mailbag@footballguys.com, and we'll get those questions answered for you. Anyway, let's switch over to the next question. And this is a guy who, this is one of your better takes last year, Troy. You really hit the nail on the head. You were banging the drum for Gabriel Davis, and he came out as a rookie and looked pretty darn good. So we've got Joey Wright asking us, what are your thoughts for Gabriel Davis now heading into year 2, 2021?
I'm very optimistic about him, more so in Dynasty, right? In redraft, I'm still not gonna, draft him very high. I honestly believe that he really is going to take a significant step, in my opinion, next year, because Cole Beasley's is still on the team, but next year they can cut Cole Beasley for a minimum dead cap. So next year, I think, is really going to be Gabriel Davis' season. I still think he makes an impact this year, but he's someone who, even though I believe in him as a talent, he's going to be more like a wide receiver 3. I don't expect it's maybe a little bit better than last season, but he's going to have some games where he's going to be very fantasy relevant. And there'll be other games where obviously it's going to be, Josh Allen either running in for a touchdown or, targeting Stephon Diggs like crazy. I don't see the other complementary pieces being super significant, but at the end of the day, I am very excited about the future of Gabriel Davis. But 2021, I think he's going to be more of a wide receiver 3 flex play. So I think that's probably going to be a ceiling.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I don't think you could really expect more than anything, like wide receiver 2 production. I wouldn't expect anything more than that. And when you look at him, he's one of those guys that does like everything well, but he doesn't do anything especially well. He's not extremely fast, extremely strong, but like he's got speed, he's got strength. It's just nothing that really blows you away when you watch him on film. But then you see 7 touchdowns as a rookie, and that's something that you can get pretty excited about. There aren't a lot of guys that come in and catch 7 touchdowns their first year in the league. So John Brown left, and you'd think that that would be pretty good news. But then I think that the Emmanuel Sanders signing just kind of cancels out John Brown leaving. Like that almost feels like a very lateral move for me. So even though Emmanuel Sanders is 34, I expect him to just pick up all of those vacated targets. I think the problem with Gabriel Davis right now, the reason that I'm struggling to buy in, I feel like he and Stephon Diggs just have such a similar skill set. The difference is Stephon Diggs just does everything a little bit better. So it's going to be tough for him to carve out a role when he's got somebody like Stephon Diggs that is such a similar player doing things better for him. So yeah, I think that he's somebody that definitely could outperform his ADP, but he's another guy that we're talking about that is pretty low in the rankings right now. Our consensus has him at wide receiver 78. And of all of the rankers over at Footballguys, the highest anybody is on him is wide receiver 55, and that's Ryan Weiss. And so, I mean, looking at that, I mean, that makes him, again, like the last guy we were just talking about, Russell Gage, not even rosterable in most formats.
I have him as wide receiver 63, but so again, like I'm not gonna go crazy over him, even though I really, really love him as a player. I got to be fair in terms of his valuation. And also, one of the things about Gabriel Davis is that he's probably like the biggest target that they have on the Bills. So I think that's another reason why he scored so many touchdowns, is because he's probably the biggest body guy. I believe he's at 6'3". So that's probably going to help him this year as well, maybe be a red zone threat. So yeah, we'll see. But, again, he's going to be wide receiver 3 flex play for you.
Yeah, he's listed, some places have him 6'2", some places have him listed as 6'3", but he's one of those guys that just looks bigger than that. There's some guys that like just look bigger than their listed height. Like Brandon Marshall always looked bigger than what he was listed at. And Gabriel Davis kind of has that same style of play. But all right, man, we really scraped the barrel here talking about Russell Gage and Gabriel Davis. Let's switch to talk about somebody that's a little bit more exciting here. We got Connor asking us on Twitter, thoughts on Clyde Edwards-Helaire this season. Obviously I don't think it's crazy to say that he disappointed a little bit last year, but what are you thinking about him for 2021?
Sure. So I want to address that, right? He didn't disappoint in terms of his overall production. He disappointed with all the crazy hype that was put on him last year, right? So when he went to the Chiefs, everybody was drafting him 101 in rookie drafts, right? Because, he's tied to Patrick Mahomes. He's going to catch 1 million passes. He's clearly going to be the RB1. He was going like top 5 in some redraft leagues, right? It's just his hype was absolutely insane. And unfortunately, he didn't live up to that hype because the Chiefs offense, as we saw, they didn't use him on the goal line. They did trick plays, everything in the world, but hand the ball off to CEH. And then he didn't catch as many passes as we expected him to because they have so many capable pass catchers. So that also hurt him. But at the same time, he was very capable of rushing the ball. That's one of the things that I think most of us were surprised about. I think most analysts was just seeing him as pass catcher, but overall he looked like a little, bowling ball out there, a lot of times, but he was an effective rusher. Yeah, he got a little banged up towards, middle end of the season, but I think right now he's being properly valued for where he should have been last year. So I think right now he's a value in somebody that I'm targeting. He's going behind most of the second year guys. So, and that's kind of where I like him. I still like people like Akers, Dobbins better, but I'm very excited about CEH. And they also didn't add anybody, right? His only competition is still Darrell Williams, who might play a small factor, but they didn't grab a running back in the draft with significant draft value. Yeah, Jerick McKinnon.
So if Jerick McKinnon scares you, you're probably not somebody that wants to buy CEH anyway.
Exactly. So overall, I'm very optimistic about him this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And last year, how how many shares of CEH I had?
Zero.
Yeah. I could not get behind that hype, man, with him going like 4th, 5th, 6th overall in redraft leagues, the 101 in rookie drafts. It was just so hard to buy into the CEH hype. Because we've seen rookies faceplant before, and you hit the nail on the head. It's not that he didn't produce. He just didn't produce up to the ADP that was grossly inflated because of, Patrick Mahomes handpicked this guy and a 1st-round pick and Damian Williams opting out. And I get it. The narrative was there for him to really go off. But I'm excited that now I can finally start actually getting on the CEH train because am I expecting him to put up like the running back 1 numbers like people were last year? Of course not, but I still think that he can be a very serviceable, mid to low end RB1 when given the chance. So yeah, you could say that he was disappointing, but something that blew my mind I just looked at this today, and I hadn't seen anybody else call this out yet. But obviously, we can look back in hindsight and say that the Le'Veon Bell signing was just a disappointment. It didn't work out. It was a failed experiment, whatever you want to say about that. But prior to him getting there, prior to Le'Veon Bell showing up in Kansas City, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was pacing for 1,347 rushing yards and 472 receiving yards. Added up, that would have been the third most scrimmage yards in the league behind just Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook. And you see it, like the game before Le'Veon Bell showed up there, he had 26 carries for 161 yards and looked like he was going to be a league winner. And then Le'Veon Bell showed up, and I don't know if it was a psychological thing or what, but his efficiency went down, his usage went down, injuries started to pile up on him, and he just wasn't the same player after that. So I think that if he's going into this year with a clean bill of health, and like we said, the only addition that they made to the backfield was adding Jerick McKinnon, which isn't something that really worries me all that much. I love it right now. And his best ball ADP on Underdog is currently at 21.7, which is crazy that you can get a potential RB1 that late in your drafts. So I am all in on CEH this year at that value.
Yeah, I currently have him ranked as running back 16, so I really like that value, and I feel like he's going around there. So he's going behind guys, kind of like I mentioned. He's going kind of like Joe Mixon, J.K. Dobbins, Akers, Swift ahead of him. So again, most of the second-year guys, but overall, I think he's going in the perfect place, and I think he's going to pay off dividends.
And the tough thing right now, and like I'm somebody who really likes him, and our consensus has him as RB15. I have him at RB17. But like we were saying about Russell Gage, we're like, how do you move him up when you've got other guys in that same tier? That's kind of how I feel when looking at CEH, because once you get out of that like top 10 or 12, it seems like it levels off for like 10 picks where you can just shuffle those running backs around any which way. And that tier that I'm talking about is, Miles Sanders, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Swift, David Montgomery, Najee Harris. Some people, I'm higher on Antonio Gibson, but other people might have Antonio Gibson in there. But it's really tough to move him up in the rankings because I feel like that tier of running backs is very similar, high risk, high reward. And it's kind of tough. Even when I'm in my best ball drafts, I've got my rankings because I have to submit rankings, but I don't treat those like the Bible when I'm in these drafts. Every once in a while, I'll reach a little bit higher for CEH, or I'll reach a little bit higher for Miles Sanders, just to kind of, thin out my exposure a little bit, because I feel like that whole tier has a lot of talent in it.
Oh, absolutely, man. Couldn't agree more.
All right, we got another one. I feel like, people are going to keep wanting to poke this bear every single week. You being a Dolphins fan, me being a Bears fan, but let's throw it out here. Jeff Bell is asking, how do you approach three-headed backfields like Miami and Chicago? I think he probably could have come up with some better examples here. There are a lot of three-headed monsters out there. But realistically, let's just talk about these two backfields. If you kind of want to highlight Miami, and then I can talk a little bit about Chicago.
Sure.
How are you looking at this backfield, and how are you hoping to break it down this year?
It's the Myles Gaskin show. So at the end of the day, it's still the Myles Gaskin show with Malcolm Brown sprinkled in. So I believe that Malcolm Brown is going to be the bigger body goal line guy. So I think that, and that's what reason I think he complements Gaskin really well, right? Because Gaskin, he's sub 200, smaller guy, but he's a great pass catcher, very quick. We saw him, get the lion's share of the work last year. He got injured, so I don't know if they're going to give him the same workload. His workload last year was crazy. But I believe that it was probably going to be similar this year because he performed. He was performing when he was asked to. So I think the only one you're going to care about is going to be Myles Gaskin. With the Brown sprinkled in, you have Salvon Ahmed, who did well in replacement of Myles Gaskin when he was out, but it was such a small sample size. I don't know how much he's going to be used except for just as a reliever. So to me, it's not as much of a three-headed backfield. I still believe it's the Gaskin show.
And I think that the Chicago backfield is kind of similar, where it's going to be the David Montgomery show. The difference is where Malcolm Brown is going to be coming in poaching goal line work. I think that you've got Tariq Cohen, who's going to be coming in and poaching passing down work, which is frustrating to see because we saw last year that David Montgomery is very capable as a pass catcher. He looked great when Tariq Cohen was out, and he had to rely on, running between the tackles, running the jet sweeps, running the screens. Like, he was doing all of it last year, and he showed that he can be a 3-down back. But with the money that is committed to Tariq Cohen, I think that they are going to continuously force feed the ball and make sure that he is relied upon. As for Damian Williams, I think Damian Williams is kind of like what you were saying about Salvon Ahmed, where, he's there. He might get, 3 to 5 carries a game, but he's not somebody that you want to even be thinking about in fantasy football unless David Montgomery were to go down. And then I think that Damian Williams steps in for the early down work. So, last year I was a big David Montgomery hater, and he proved me wrong. He had a great situation down the stretch where he absolutely killed it. But this year I'm slightly above the consensus on him. I've got him at RB19, where the rest of the guys have him, ranked at RB20. Troy, I could check for you real quickly to see where
I
you
got
got
it.
him.
I have currently at running back 18.
18. So yeah, we're all about that same spot, and I feel like he's kind of in that same tier as CEH. Where and it's weird to think that because you think that CH is such a higher ceiling, but I think that if you're getting David Montgomery, you're not drafting him with the hopes that he's going to do what he did last year. You're drafting him with the hopes that he is going to be a solid RB2 that you can count on consistently week in and week out, 12 to 15 touches or 12 to 15 carries a game with an occasional touchdown here and there. That's where you're hoping for David Montgomery. But if you're drafting him with the hopes that he is going to put up those, what was it, RB3 or whatever down the stretch, that's not happening again with Rudy Cohen there. So you gotta forget about that. All right, we're gonna stay on. We've got another question about Myles Gaskin here, and this one is just a would you rather? I'm assuming draft. The question just came from Jordan Vanek, and all it is Myles Gaskin or Chris Carson. Who are you taking here, Troy?
I hate this question, but I currently have Chris Carson ranked higher. So I have Chris Carson ranked at running back 19, and I have Myles Gaskin ranked at running back 22. So, and to be honest, closer to the season, I wouldn't be surprised if Gaskin outperforms Carson. I wouldn't be surprised if Carson outperforms Gaskin. It's a very solid question because I view them pretty similarly, right? I don't have them too far apart in my rankings. I just feel that Carson, and the only knock against him is that he deals with injuries. But when he's on the field, he is the show, and he's always used at the goal line. Gaskin actually struggled. That's like probably one of his biggest weaknesses last year is that he did everything well, but he wasn't efficient on the goal line. I don't know if it's because he's sub 200 or he's not the biggest guy, but he didn't do well on the goal line. Chris Carson, he scores a lot of touchdowns. He's utilized in the red zone a lot. And you could, I guess one knock you can say is that he's not as much of a pass catcher as Gaskin is. So maybe that is an argument you can give for Gaskins. But I just see that Chris Carson is getting the big play opportunities, the money zone opportunities to score those touchdowns we all love.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I'm taking Carson, and my reasoning is a little bit wider. I'm pretty on the consensus with my ranking with Myles Gaskin. I've got him as a low end RB2. But I was shocked to see that I thought I was going to be higher on Chris Carson than anybody on the Football Guys staff. I put my ranking in there with Carson as RB12, which technically makes him a low end RB1. And I thought there's no way anybody's going to rank Chris Carson higher than I have. And then Sigmund Bloom came in with him at RB11. So you got two guys on the Football Guys staff right now that are expecting an RB1 season out of Chris Carson. And this is just an easy question for me. There's so many reasons that people want to hate on him, and I just don't get it. People claim injuries, and he's had some injuries, but all running backs get injured. And in the last 3 years, Chris Carson has only missed 7 games. People want to talk about fumbles. Yeah, he had that, stretch where he fumbled some balls and it was tough, but all of last year, he coughed the ball up once. People want to talk about Rashad Penny. Rashad Penny is going to come in. That man, you want to talk about injuries and Chris Carson, but then you're going to say that Rashad Penny is somebody to worry about. Rashad Penny has not been able to stay healthy his entire career, and the Seahawks already declined his 5th-year tender. So for whatever reason, people are just always looking for a reason to hate on Chris Carson, and I do not understand it. He's extremely talented. He's on an explosive offense. If he's healthy, he should easily see 250 carries. He gets the passing down work. He gets the red zone work. So I love Chris Carson, and I'd be shocked to see him, if he can put in a full 17 games, I'd be shocked to see him finish outside of RB1 territory.
Nah, man, I agree with you.
Sticking with running backs for a little bit here. Let's move over to Buffalo, and this was a little hot topic on Twitter today. But we got somebody asking us here, who is the running back to roster in Buffalo? Even Matt Breida's there now. You want to say Devin Singletary or Zach Moss, but now you got Matt Breida in the mix. I saw somebody on Twitter today say that they had Matt Breida projected to get the most carries of anybody on the Buffalo Bills. Maybe it was a hot take. I don't really know, but there are people out there saying it. But what do you think? Who's the guy to roster in Buffalo, Troy?
Well, I definitely disagree with the Matt Breida thing. I think he's just a body. We saw the whole experiment with him with the Dolphins. Not saying it's going to be exactly the same scenario, but I am not excited about Breida in that offense. So I struggled with this question but I actually have Singletary at 37 and Zach Moss at 38. Now, with Zach Moss, I'll start off with, the reason why people like Zach Moss better, because people believe that he's the goal line back. He caught passes, and he was involved. And towards the back half of the season, they were using him sort of like the RB1. But at the same time, to me, and I'm not saying it's going to be exactly the same, but Singletary, his rookie year, to me, he was a solid running back. I don't know what happened last year where he looked a little bit more pedestrian. I think the issue with him was that he had some explosive plays. It just he wasn't really used in the red zone, but he did catch passes. Like he was being targeted. He was used in that area, and just he has more wiggle, and I don't know what it is, but he has more wiggle. We've seen Zach Moss, and you see all those jokes about Zach Moss, he's slow or whatever. And I just think that Singletary, if given the opportunity, or if they handed the ball off or given him the goal line opportunities, I think Singletary could be slightly better. And full disclosure, I'm not interested in any of them, but I give the slight nod to Singletary. Again, I have him ranked back to back. So if you want to make an argument for Moss, go ahead, but I'll say Singletary.
Yeah, Moss is somebody who I am higher on, and I'm a little bit higher on Moss than the consensus. I'm a little bit lower on Singletary than the consensus, and I agree with you. Like Devin Singletary looked good 2 years. I mean, not great, but and maybe not even good, but he looked good enough. Like he looked like he could be the team's lead back 2 years ago. Then they went out and brought in Zach Moss, kind of messed the whole thing up, and you could see that Zach Moss got off to a really slow start, and I think it was because of that toe injury. And then as the season progressed, they kept giving him more and more opportunities, and it looked like he was going to take over the role. And that's why I'm on the Zach Moss train. I don't think that talent wise he's you know uh, that much better than Devin Singletary, but it just seems like the team is committed to him. And the fact that they didn't go out in free agency and get any of these great running backs that were available, they didn't even think about any running backs in the draft as well. But then today Heath Cummings put this out on Twitter and said something about it, and he pointed out that Devin Singletary averaged more yards per carry, yards per reception, yards per target, yards per touch, and yards per game than Zach Moss, which is kind of shocking. And that wasn't something that I realized until he had pointed that out. But when you look at it a little bit deeper, I think that Moss is still the guy. He's getting those goal line touches. He had 8 touches inside the 5 last year and didn't do too well, just scored on 2 of them. Josh Allen is, the team's RB1 by all intents and purposes, but I still like Zach Moss, and he's somebody that I'm okay taking as an RB3 in, the 7th or 8th round. But now when I'm looking at it with Singletary dropping into the 12th and 13th round in drafts, he might be the better value realistically. So, you ask me right now, I'd say that Moss is the guy to roster, but as this offseason shakes out, I could see myself moving a little bit more and more towards the Singletary argument.
Look, man, we'll see. It's going to be an interesting scenario because whoever, I don't know, there's some truthers on both sides. So whoever ends up being the RB1, we're going to hear about it all on Twitter. So,
Yep. Now, a lot of the questions that we've had today are asking us our opinions on crowded backfields, crowded wide receiver rooms, whatever it may be. And we got another one coming up right now. Before I pull this other question up, I just want to remind you, keep dropping those questions in the chat. We will get to them at the end of the show. But here's one that we got from Camden Hayes. Am I wrong for thinking that AB, Antonio Brown, is the best value in the Bucks passing game? What do you think, Troy?
in terms of, okay, we're just talking about value just because he's going so late. I guess you can make an argument for it, but I still, I'm too high on Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to agree with that statement. I get where he's coming from, but to me, I'm just like, I still think it's the Chris Godwin and Mike Evans show. And then there's going to be AB sprinkled in. I know that, and he's going to actually be there for a full season in terms of being able to play. And I know there's some rapport. I know Tom Brady loves Antonio Brown, and we saw flashes, but we just didn't see that much of Antonio. He had glimpses, but just if we're believing that's going to be similar usage to last year, then I'll say his value's fine, but I'm not going to say it's the best value. I think that Chris Godwin, I believe, might be going a little bit behind Mike Evans, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll say Chris Godwin if I had to pick the best value.
Now, I'm somebody that I am just going nuts over Antonio Brown. And I like the way this question was phrased by saying, am I wrong for thinking? Because no, I don't think you're wrong for thinking that. Right now in my best ball drafts, I've got 65% exposure on Antonio Brown. I can't get enough of this guy. A few weeks ago, he was going in the 12th and 13th round. He's starting to creep his way up. You got to reach for him in the 8th or 9th round. And I think that that's still a very, very fair value. Now, I feel like a lot of the reasons that Antonio Brown is still getting faded by some people are because of the personality problems he's had. whatever that may be. And yeah, that's definitely a risk that you take when you draft a guy like Antonio Brown or Josh Gordon or a lot of these receivers that have personality issues. But last year he only played half the season, and he became progressively more involved as the season went on. A lot of people don't realize this, but in Week 17, the final game of the season, Antonio Brown garnered 15 targets from Tom Brady. Like Tom Brady, you called it out, Troy. Tom Brady loves Antonio Brown, and I think that he's going to try to make it work. If you look post game or postseason included, over the last 6 games, Antonio Brown has caught 6 touchdowns. So he is a preferred target of Tom Brady. And, the floor for all of these guys, I think, is going to be dangerous. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Antonio Brown, I think all three of them are going to have weeks where they just put up absolutely nothing because of how many weapons are on this offense. So I don't think that you can rely on Mike Evans or Chris Godwin as a consistent guy. So give me the guy that's going later if I'm chasing upside in this offense. And one other thing I want to point out, I mean, a lot of people have been playing fantasy football for a long time and know how dominant Antonio Brown was. But for those of you that have just gotten into this over the last couple of years, let me just rattle off this 6-year stretch that Antonio Brown had. In 2013, he was the wide receiver 3. In 2014, he was the wide receiver 1. 2015, he was the wide receiver 2. 2016, he was the wide receiver 1. 2017, also the wide receiver 1. And then 2018, the wide receiver 2. That is 6 straight years with a top 3 finish. I don't think we've ever seen anybody dominate like that. So, he's about to turn 33. You can't ignore the risk, but going in the 9th and 10th round right now, I love that value, and I'm all over Antonio Brown.
Hey man, it might work out for you.
it might, and it might, he might get suspended by doing some crazy stuff this season, and then 65% of my best ball teams are just completely ruined. That's the risk we take playing this game. But now we got a question coming up, and this one is kind of league specific, not about a player or anything like that. But how do you feel about league voting on trades?
I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I think when I first started fantasy, I thought it was the norm. But I quickly became one of those people where I'm like, nah, like because if we're playing in a league together, right, I'm assuming that this other person knows what they're doing and I know what I'm doing. Or even if they make bad decisions, they're aware of the decisions that they're making. So if you have 2 people, and I'm not a big veto guy. So I'm like, no, if I'm agreeing to make a trade with somebody, let the trade stand. Unless it's, and we talked about, unless it's obvious collusion, right? So if I'm sending a 4th round pick for Saquon Barkley, then yeah, clearly there's something not right with that. But besides that, crazy scenario, no, I think that you shouldn't be voting. Just let people trade.
Yeah, I don't want to bring up any specifics from leagues that I've been in the past and, really upset a bunch of my league mates here. So I'm not going to go that route, but I agree, man. We're all adults playing this game. I think that, voting on trades as far as the entire league voting isn't something that should be done. I feel like if you're in a league, you want to make sure that you're in a league that has a commissioner that you respect and that you trust, and you have to leave that decision up to the commissioner. If it's something that is obvious collusion, let the commissioner decide. But, saying that, 4 people don't like this trade, because we've seen it in the past. I'm sure you've been in a league before where some juggernaut that has, Christian McCaffrey and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and a bunch of 1st-round picks, they make their team that much better. And it's gotten to the point where, nobody can beat this team because they traded away assets to put themselves in an even better win-now position. And yeah, it's not fun to be in a league when somebody is doing that, but that's the game that we play. And sometimes teams just start to run away like that. And I feel like a lot of people get bent in their leagues because they see, one team just getting too good, and they start, vetoing trades because of that. So I'm with you on this. We don't have to spend too much time on this. I feel like the hardcore fantasy players like myself and you, we're somebody where we're just going to leave it up to the commissioner, leave it up to good faith. I don't think that league voting is really the way that we should be going anymore in these leagues. All right. Let's get back to some football talk, though. Rough transition there, but it worked. Plug in a little. We got to talk about players for a minute. So let's get back. What Patriots pass catchers are worth rostering in 12-team leagues? This is a tough one, Troy. Who are you rostering here?
Jonnu, Hunter Henry. That's about it, and maybe Nelson Aguilar. But I think those three, I think you can roster in, because with tight ends, again, you can't be picky when it comes to tight ends. So we know that either Hunter Henry or Jonnu is going to be the guy, or be more of the guy than the other. So I'm fine. Those are the 2 guys I'm really looking for. And then Cam, we've seen him in the past with Carolina with Greg Olsen, rely on his tight ends. Last year, he didn't target his tight ends because his tight ends were not talented. So he didn't throw to his tight ends. So now he actually has, two tight ends that the Patriots went out and they paid significant money for them. They're planning on using them in the offense, right? And I don't think it's just the block. So to me, you want to focus on those two. In terms of wide receiver, I know Jacoby Myers did his thing last year, but I think that there's a reason why they brought in two other wide receivers. I think Nelson Aguilar, if I had to pick like an actual wide receiver.
Yeah. I mean, I think all these pass catches are pretty gross. This is a team that we saw last year at what did they throw 430 times or something like that. This is not a team that I want anything to do with the pass catchers there. So me personally, I don't want any of them. I'm sorry, 368 throws. That's what Cam Newton attempted last year. I don't want to be a part of that pass catching core. Like I like Damian Harris a lot. I like Cam Newton even if you're in a super flex league. I think Cam Newton could put up some decent numbers, but. I turned this question over to my friend Jeff Bell because he has been beating the drum for Jonnu Smith. So Jeff Bell, he just got onboarded over at Footballguys. He's going to be a special contributor for them, and he just came out with an article. So I asked him for his guidance on this question a little bit, and here's the argument that he made for Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith was a tight end 5 over the first month of the season with A.J. Brown out and just 6.85 targets per game. In 2011, when Aaron Hernandez played that role as the moving tight end, he saw 8 targets per game. So the argument is that a tight end in a primary receiver role is gold, obviously. And with Jonnu's physical tools, he could end up being a top 5 tight end. So, I kind of get it. I can see why you could make the argument for Jonnu. They just made him the third highest paid tight end in the league. And then, there's also reports that he can be used as a goal line back as well. So if that ends up being true, yeah, I think that Jonnu Smith could absolutely smash his current ADP. But I still feel like there's a lot of risk baked in there, and it's not something that I'm really going crazy over. So yeah, Jonnu probably offers the highest ceiling, but if you want my question, I don't think that there's really any pass catchers that you should be going out of your way to get on the Patriots.
Yeah, I know. I understand the argument. I'm not looking forward to him, but I had to answer the question.
Right, exactly. Now we got a question from Jeff Hasley here, and this is a fun one. And the example he gave were Cole Beasley and Brandon Cooks, but let's try to think outside the box a little bit when answering this one. Would you rather have a decent wide receiver 2 on a good team or a wide receiver 1 on a bad team? Case in point, he used Cole Beasley on a good team, the wide receiver 2 behind Stephon Diggs, and then Brandon Cooks, the wide receiver 1 on a expectedly bad team, if we can assume that Deshaun Watson is going to be playing there. But how would you take this scenario?
Give me the wide receiver 1. I want the wide receiver 1 because most likely, if it's a bad team, then there are not going to be too many options in terms of the passing game, right? They're limited options normally if it's a bad team. So the wide receiver 1 is most likely going to get more targets in that particular scenario. So for me, and exactly, he gave Cole Beasley Brandon Cooks. I would rather Brandon Cooks, So for the most part, and let's say Allen Robinson's a good example, right? He was on a bad team for quite some time, whether it was the Jags, whether it was the Bears, and guess what? He got a lot of targets in his career. Now they actually have a quarterback, but that's the reason why. Give me the wide receiver 1 on a bad team just because of the opportunity.
And I feel like, in this specific situation, like I'd prefer Brandon Cooks over Cole Beasley. But I feel like this is such a broad question. Like you point out Allen Robinson, who is a wide receiver 1 on a bad team. And then you've also got guys like Brandon Cooks. But then you've also got guys like Rashad Perriman and Denzel Mims or Corey Davis, whoever that is. Like there's some guys where I would prefer the wide receiver too, depending on what team we're talking about. So I feel like this is kind of a broad question. But in Dynasty, I definitely prefer just the more talented guy. But in redraft, I usually treat those really bad offenses like kryptonite that I want nothing to do with. Like I don't want Tyrell Williams, I don't want Rashad Perriman, I don't want Quintez Cephas or Amon St. Brown. I don't want any of those guys on my redraft rosters. And something that always sticks out to me, you remember that 2013 Denver Broncos team that was just absolutely bonkers on offense. And they said that, I forget who broke it down, but somebody basically said that if you had that entire team's roster as your starting fantasy lineup, like if every single week you started Peyton Manning, Demaryius Thomas, Wes Welker, Eric Decker, Julius Thomas, and Noshawn Moreno, you would have come first place in any fantasy league. And that's the wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, and wide receiver 3 on that team. So obviously that's like an extreme end of the spectrum there. And then when we're talking about Allen Robinson, that's like an extreme end of the talent spectrum. So I feel like this is a deep question that you kind of need to take case by case. I feel like you could make an argument for either. But like if you're asking me if I'd rather have Tyler Lockett, like the wide receiver 2 on a great offense, as opposed to Rashad Perriman, the wide receiver 1 on a poor offense, I'm taking Tyler Lockett in that scenario. I feel like you can just kind of twist this
Yeah,
one so much that it makes it kind of tough. But in this specific one, Brandon Cooks would definitely be my guy over
yeah,
Cole Beasley. So we got Jeff
agreed.
Hasley asking us a question here, Football Guys Zone, and then we've also got Chris Allen, also from Football Guys, asking how much are either of y'all factoring in strength of schedule into your redraft rankings? Troy?
I don't, because you know why? Because in terms of strength of schedule, we only have the data for the defenses based off last year. The defenses have changed, right, with the personnel. So all like the top defenses, not necessarily going to be top defenses this year, or the bad defenses aren't necessarily going to be as bad as they were last year. So to me, there's too many unpredictable factors and to have to rank based off of strength of schedule. I would say that maybe very minimally. You know, there's some defenses that we know are like, elite. So, but at the end of the day, it factors very little into my rankings.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I'll keep this one short, but I'm kind of the same way. I don't worry about it too much. Like you said, there's just so many factors that are tough to predict. We saw the Jaguars in 2018 go to the AFC Championship and lose to the Patriots with a dominant defense. And then the very next year, people were worried about teams that had to face that Jaguars defense, and rightfully so, because they were unbelievable the year before. Well, they came out the next year, they won 5 games, and they were terrible on defense. And it's so hard to predict how a team is going to carry over year with personnel changes and coaching changes. And there's just so much that happens, so much to predict, that I feel like strength of schedule is just something that is injected into a very slow time of the year for the NFL, just to give us something to talk about for a week until mini camps start. Really, I think that's what strength of schedule is. But
I mean, that's fair.
so we've gotten a couple of these questions where people are asking us to break down trades in the league, and this one is a monster. So I'm gonna read this one out for the audio listeners. We got a super flex PPR trade. We got one team giving up Patrick Mahomes, DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams, um, and is receiving Michael Evans, Jalen Hurts, Harris Marshall, two 2022 firsts, a 2022 second, a 2023 first, and two 2023 seconds. That is a lot to compress right there. But Troy, who do you think won this trade? I mean, this this is crazy, man. This is one of the biggest dynasty trades I've ever seen.
I would say I like the pick side, shockingly. But I'm thinking is like that is a lot of first, man. So you get it. So yeah, so you get 222 first. So
Three
you get
first,
three first
three
total, and
seconds.
you get 3 seconds, and then you get Jalen Hurts, who I'm extremely high on, and if he performs well this year, then he's going to be the Eagle starter. So is it that crazy? Let's say he just balls out, right? Maybe he could have a Lamar-esque type year, with his rushing, and we're expecting him to take a step forward as a passer. We had a limited sample size. Terrace Marshall, he's a good sleeper, with Carolina. We'll see how he performs there. Reunited with Joe Brady. And Mike Evans, man, Mike Evans is a solid wide receiver. And then Jamal Williams, I don't even care about Jamal Williams in this scenario. So it's really just Patrick Mahomes, DeAndre Swift. I love Patrick Mahomes, but I got to go to pick side.
Yeah, man. There isn't a lot that you could if I'm a Patrick Mahomes owner in my league, there isn't a lot that you can do to get Patrick Mahomes out of my grasp. But if you're giving me three firsts, 3 seconds, Mike Evans, Jalen Hurts, and Terrace Marshall, I'll take that pick all day. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's very rare that I see a trade involving Patrick Mahomes where I don't prefer the Patrick Mahomes side. But I'm with you, man. That is a haul. And yeah, Jamal Williams, he's just kind of throwing at that point a little insurance for the guy that's getting DeAndre Swift. But yeah, Jalen Hurts, I think that he could put up QB1 numbers this year, and then you're going to get yourself at least one good pick out of those three first. So I'm with you. I'm with the pick side on this one. All right, before we head over to the chat, real quickly, I just want to thank everybody once again for tuning in and remind you that if you are watching shows like this in June, you are probably a pretty serious fantasy football player. And as we all know, consistently winning at fantasy football is challenging and it takes a lot of time. So you need to get yourself a Football Guys premium subscription that will give you an edge and help make winning decisions for you in less time. And even better, our way of saying thanks to serious players like yourself is by offering an early bird discount that is available right now on our website. Just head to footballguys.com. Up in the top right corner, there's an orange button that says join now. click that, and it'll take you to our early bird discount pricing. We will do the work, and you will do the winning. All right, Troy. I don't know if you've looked at the chat too much. Were there any good questions that popped out for you so far this year, or so far this week?
Man, I've not looked at the chat, man. I've just been looking at you. I like that shirt.
Thank you. All right, here's one that I like. Fellas, are there any good buy low, relatively cheap, ideally young running backs to acquire that you recommend targeting now that may increase in value over the next year? So, off the top of your head, if you want to think about this one for a little bit, I actually see Zara. It looks like he beat me to this one by shouting out a guy that I like. But yeah, one of the guys that I like that's cheap right now and relatively young that I think is going to have a really big year is Damian Harris. And I've talked about him on 2-point
How's
stance
he
with
my
Warren
answer?
Carpenter. He's a guy right now that I just think is going for way too cheap. And right now getting drafted in the 5th and 6th round in redrafts, sliding all the way to like the 9th and 10th round in dynasty leagues. He's a guy that I think is going to outperform his ADP. We only saw Sony Michel and Damian Harris healthy for 2 games last year. Through that whole 16-game season, they only played twice. And in the games that they played, Damian Harris had twice as many carries and 3 times as many yards. So I think that it's pretty obvious right now that Damian Harris is the preferred guy. I think them going out and getting Jonnu Smith just is going to help them even more with the run blocking. And like we said when we were talking about the Patriots pass catchers earlier, I think this is a team that is very committed to running the ball. And if Damian Harris is going to be the guy there, we haven't seen a Patriots running back put up fantasy relevant numbers since the Corey Dillon days back in the mid 2000s. But I think Damian Harris can buck that trend. So Damian Harris is a guy that I'd go out and get. I'll let you mention another guy, and if it's not the other guy I've got in mind, I've got another guy that I'll even talk about that's a good buy low option right now.
So I have a couple guys I can rattle off. So I'll start off with Gus Edwards. So Gus Edwards, he's fairly young, and we saw him how he was used with the Ravens last year. He was pretty much the 1B to J.K. Dobbins 1A. And they put a 2nd-round tender on him this year, so clearly they wanted to keep him. He's still with the Ravens. He's going to be very utilized in the Ravens offense. And we know how the Ravens offense is designed on rushing. And they're not going to give J.K. Dobbins 100% of the work. And they used Gus Edwards a lot in the red zone last year. So for me, he's somebody. Also, A.J. Dillon. So even though Aaron Jones obviously re-signed and people, I believe, are now completely out on A.J. Dillon, but A.J. Dillon's also still going to have a role. Maybe it's not going to be exactly like Jamal Williams because they're just different type of backs, but he's somebody who's obviously everyone was extremely high on when they thought Aaron Jones was going to be out of town, but now that he's staying with the Packers, I believe people have soured on A.J. Dillon a bit. So I think that's someone you can also probably buy low on right now.
Yeah, one other guy I'd like to call out is Ronald Jones, and I get it that that's a very frustrating backfield right now in Tampa Bay. Ronald Jones is a guy right now who is going for very, very cheap in dynasty leagues. He's another guy that I've been picking up in all of my startups and trying to make some offers for right now. And this might be another really frustrating year where maybe you can buy him even for cheaper after this year because he's going to be in another frustrating timeshare with Leonard Fournette. But at the end of the day, Ronald Jones is a very, very, very good runner. We saw it last year with him just breaking tackles and ripping off these long runs. He can do the things that Leonard Fournette can't. And if he's able to develop as a pass catcher a little bit, which I'm not holding on to hope for, but just what he does as a runner itself is pretty special. And if he can add that extra layer to his game and they don't feel the need to have a committee anymore, I think that Ronald Jones is another guy that can really, really start to see a pretty big rise over the next year or so.
Oh no, absolutely. I'm a Ronald Jones guy. He was extremely talented, and last year he definitely showed some signs of him being such a good running back. But then Leonard Fournette got healthy. He kind of took over. It was like a lot of back and forth between Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones last year. So I think that Ronald Jones, I like that call a lot.
I always like these questions that we got coming out here, and Zaraz asking us just this player or this player. I always love answering these. We got CeeDee Lamb or Chris Godwin. Troy, you need a minute to think about this one, or right off the top of your head who you're taking here?
I have different answers in terms of redraft or dynasty. Dynasty, I like CeeDee Lamb. Redraft, I'm going to go Chris Godwin.
And I'm a Chris Godwin guy in both formats, and I get it. A lot of people are really excited about CeeDee Lamb, and he looked great last year, and they got Dak Prescott coming back, and they got that weak defense. And there's a lot of things to get excited about. But I think Chris Godwin is just a level above CeeDee Lamb when it comes to pure talent. I mean, we saw last year Where I mean, 2 years ago in 2019, people were touting Chris Godwin as the wide receiver one in Dynasty. And then he breaks his pinky, and Antonio Brown comes in, and Rob Gronkowski comes in, and there was a lot of shakeup that happened in the Bucs last year, and it didn't fare well for Chris Godwin. But I'm chalking up that as just an off year. I don't think that we're going to see another year like we saw from Chris Godwin in 2021, or I'm sorry, in 2020. I think that is going to be looked at as one of the worst years in his career, and I think that it's only going to get better from here on out. So I'm a Chris Godwin guy in both redraft and dynasty. And I know we talked a little bit earlier about Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, but I actually have Chris Godwin ranked above Mike Evans in redraft this year for 2021. I think the dude is just a special, special talent, and I hope that we can see him get back to his 2019 form this year.
Wow, above Mike Evans, I can understand. Two spots. Okay. That's fair.
All right, we got a dynasty roster construction question here. I took over a dynasty team with CMC and Saquon rostered, but very little depth. In that situation, do I try and ride them to a title or trade them for depth? Troy, what would you do if you took over an orphan that had CMC, Saquon, and nothing else?
So the thing about it is, it really depends on how many like running backs you have to start. It depends on your wide receiver situation, things like that. So it really depends on how many players do you have to start. And if you're an orphan, most likely, I'm assuming that you're not a contender. So for me, I would try to sell either or for as big of a haul as I can, whether it's for picks, whether it's for depth. That's personally what I would do, just because you didn't mention the rest of your roster. So I'm assuming the rest of your roster is not, mention worthy. Yeah, exactly. So to me, that's a concern. So I would be on the side of I would sell one of them to try to get whether picks or depth or whatever you can get.
Yeah, I heard once that you should either be winning or rebuilding and nothing in the middle. So if you think that like maybe I can make a run with this team, I don't think that that's what you should really be doing. I think that what you should do is try to sell for as many picks and young assets as you can. And Saquon is the one where maybe I'd hold on to him just because I feel like his value right now on a team might be a little bit higher than his value on the trade market. A lot of people are worried about him coming back from an injury and whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, Saquon is still, probably the most talented running back in the league. And he's still 23 or 24. How old is Saquon right now? I mean,
he's around there. Yeah.
So if you're rebuilding, like that's the type of thing that you want to rebuild around is a young running back like Saquon. Yeah, I just looked it up. He's 24 years old. Just turned 24 years old.
CMC is also young. So both of them are young. The issue is that like kind of like you said, I'm guessing that you're not just going to always win with just both of them. If the rest of your roster, again, if you had Quintez Cephas as like your starting wide receiver, then even if you have those two running backs, you're most likely going to be in the middle. So
yeah. And that's the worst place you can be in a fantasy or in a dynasty league is in the middle. So the advice that I got was that if you're not a top 3 team and you're not a serious contender, just blow it up and get as many picks as you can and give it another shot next year. So, if you think this team, if you've got enough pieces, if you got a handful of wide receiver 2s and a competent quarterback and you think that you could still make a run, I'd go for it. But if it's really that thin on the outside, just blow it up and try again next year. This is an interesting question, and this one might be tough to answer on the spot. Might make you have to think a little bit, but is there a logical fantasy argument that you just can't get behind? And the example that Diego Lopez is using here is I can't accept that Kenyon Drake is bad news for Josh Jacobs. So I guess, is there like an argument right now that everyone is just kind of spouting this fact that you disagree with, Troy?
Well, first, I want to address that because I do think that Drake is bad for Jacobs. I've been on record saying that. And the reasons why is because Jacobs, and it kind of just shows, and I believe it's what the Raiders think of Jacobs. Jacobs has been kind of banged up, through his career. Nothing serious, and he's played through some injuries. But Drake not only is a capable rusher, but he's also a capable pass catcher. So they paid him. They didn't just pay him backup money. They paid him enough where you believe that he's going to have a role in the offense. So Jacobs was already not seeing the targets in the offense. So now you're bringing in a capable running back. This isn't, Jalen Richard. Drake has been, like RB1, RB2 type of running back. So he's the type of guy that is going to hurt Jacobs and also the offensive line is worse. So Jacobs' outlook for at least for 2021 isn't great. But Drake, I believe, does spell bad news for Jacobs. But in terms of any other take, I just can't get behind. People who are Jalen Hurts haters. I would say that I don't like Jalen Hurts haters because I'm very optimistic about Jalen Hurts. And everyone's talking about, his passer rating, his passer rating. Yeah, he's a rookie that got thrown into a horrible situation, horrible offensive line, throwing to practice squad guys. Like, let's be honest, like he didn't have a fair shot. So now he has an off season, a full season of being the starter. Granted, they have Devonta Smith now. They still have a lot of work. I don't know how good of an overall team they're going to be, but I believe we see Jalen Hurts take that next step. So if I had to make an argument, I don't like the Jalen Hurts haters.
Man, the polarization on Jalen Hurts rankings on the Football Guys page right now is just unbelievable. The consensus has him as the QB10, but he is as high as QB4 from some people and as low
Oh,
as QB21 from others. I mean, just the love that some people have for him and the hate that other people have for him. Realistically, yeah, he's somewhere in the middle there. I've got him sitting as QB7, which, obviously I came up with that ranking, so I think it's a good ranking. But man, to see him as high as 4 and as low as 21 from
I have him at
San Francisco State
9.
website is crazy. Yeah, and I feel like that's where he should be, kind of like a mid to low end QB1. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. A lot of people are hating, and I just can't get behind it. Hate all you want, but at the end of the day, a running quarterback in fantasy football is a cheat code. We saw it with Tim Tebow, Robert Griffin, these guys that were just killing it as runners. So I guess the one take that I'd have that is probably logical to a lot of people that I can't get behind. Everyone, when Curtis Samuel signed with Washington, and they said this is good for Terry McLaurin, and everyone thinks that having a second pass catcher in Washington is going to be good for Terry McLaurin. And I don't believe that. As soon as Curtis Samuel went there, I dropped Terry McLaurin down my rankings a lot. Curtis Samuel has garnered 200 targets over the last 2 years, and I think that he's going to see between 85 and 110 targets in Washington. Now, this hurts me to say because I've been a huge proponent for Terry McLaurin over the last 2 years, but the reason that Terry McLaurin was so good in fantasy is because of the opportunity. He was number one in snap share. He was number one in route participation. He was what were some of the other ones? Number 6 in yards after the catch because he was able to blow the top off the defenses. There was one other. Number 9 in targets, number 10 in routes run, number 8 in team pass plays per game. So he had all of the opportunity in the world going for him. And now with a second pass catcher there, it worries me just a little bit. So Terry McLaurin, he has slid down my rankings just a little bit. I had him as a low end wide receiver 1. Now I've got him as more of a mid wide receiver 2. And people that are saying that he's going to have a top 5 finish, it's just not something I can really get behind.
Nah, I don't believe he's gonna have a top 5 finish. I think that's crazy. I believe that's like kind of like last year when people had DJ Moore as like a wide receiver 1 locked in. I think DJ Moore is gonna have a good season, but I don't think he's gonna be a wide receiver 1. And I don't think Terry McLaurin, maybe he flirts with like low wide receiver 1, but I think he's most likely. I think maybe high end wide receiver 2. That's where I have. Yeah. I have him currently as wide receiver 10. So yeah, back in wide receiver 1.
Yeah, and I could see it happening in his range of outcomes, but people that are trying to say that Curtis Samuel is good for him, I think that they're just a little bit diluted right there. I think it's kind of crazy to think that adding a talented pass catcher is going to help somebody who got the majority of his opportunity or the majority of his fantasy points because of opportunity. But anyway, I want to thank everybody so much for tuning in. As always, the chat was going crazy. Appreciate all the questions and the feedback. Love to see that there. Hope you guys all got a chance to check out yesterday's episode of 2 Point Stance. We got a double dose of Dave and Troy on the Football Guys shows this week. We will not be around next week. I will be traveling and taking the week off, but you can find me again in just a couple weeks back on Football Guys. I want to remind you to subscribe to the YouTube page at youtube.com/footballguystv, where you can see all the rest of our shows. And thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you in a couple weeks.